Maybe they don't have it on yet?
I don't know that it's on yet. I think
VOD, right?
oh, there he is. You know, he looks a lot like a gangster from the 30s.
Oh, is Joe remote?
That's what he is. He has COVID. So you could have done this.
Yeah, because I could also just return from the office.
Yeah, okay.
It's a combination of and slap.
Yeah, yeah.
And I had to.
Hey, hey, nobody cares.
Okay, so did you hear from him?
Yeah, his video. Okay, there he is. Okay. And so,
Yeah, I have to.
Oh, green. Okay.
Flying back from Singapore. That's why.
okay, good evening, everybody. I'm going to call to order this first meeting of the Planning Commission for 2024. And before we launch into our agenda, we have one commissioner who has to appear remotely, and so I'm going to turn things over to Jolie and to Joe. Joe, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Hello.
Okay, and
Yeah.
we can hear you and we can see you. Okay, so go.
I'll start. So tonight, what Mr. Beninato is going to do, he wants to request to attend this meeting remotely under AB 2449. And as I've mentioned before at meetings, you can come under 2449 if you have just cause. And just cause is defined to include caregiving of a family member, having a contagious illness, having a mental or physical disability, or travel on official business. And then, or you can request to participate remotely due to emergency circumstances with a brief description of the circumstances. And that includes physical or family medical emergency. But so tonight, Mr. Beninato needs to state why he is wants to participate remotely. So, Mr. Beninato, you're coming under just cause, I would assume?
Yes, and I'm sorry, my camera is doing weird things. Am I back?
Yes.
There we go. Yes, I have COVID, so I did not want to infect all of you. You're welcome.
Yes. And so then tonight, the council, the planning commission should make a motion to allow him to participate.
All right.
And since it came up after the agenda was posted, it wasn't on the agenda, so we need to vote to allow him to participate
And I'm going to
remotely.
exercise my discretion as chair to make that motion. I move that we permit Commissioner Beninato to appear remotely. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Okay, there's a motion. I've moved, and Commissioner Ahi has seconded the motion to permit that. So if we
Yes.
can take, Stephanie, if you can call the roll.
Commissioner Disney? Aye. Commissioner Ahi?
Yes.
Commissioner Roach?
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger?
Yes.
And Commissioner Steinle?
Yes.
And one last requirement, he'll be able to, the public will be able to participate video and through audio, and we're set up for that. And Mr. Beninato, you need to disclose whether anyone over the age of 18 is in the room with you during the meeting. And you must remain on camera. You can turn your mute. You can mute yourself if you start coughing. But is there anyone over 18 in the room with you?
I am alone in my room for the last many days.
Okay, so we can go on with the meeting.
It's nice to see some live humans.
Okay. Welcome, Joe. Okay, the first order of business is to establish a quorum, so I guess we should go through technically, we just did it, sort of, but we should probably establish a quorum anyway. So Stephanie, can we do the roll call again and make sure everybody's here?
Commissioner Disney. Commissioner Ahi.
Yes.
Commissioner Roach.
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger.
Yes.
Commissioner Beninato.
Yes.
Commissioner Steinle.
Yes.
And let the record show that Commissioner Doran is absent.
Okay. So we have established the quorum, and the first item is our consent calendar, which is the minutes from our last meeting of October, I think it was 19, and it's simply to approve that. The first thing is I will invite a motion to approve the minutes, and
I think we have to ask for public comments if there's
Oh,
anything. items not on
yeah,
the agenda.
if no, you're right. Okay, if there's anybody.
I'm on.
All right. Okay. Okay, so we will begin with comments by members of the public on a matter not on the agenda. If anybody has such a comment, now would be the time. We ask that everybody who is going to make a comment fill out a speaker card, which are those yellow pieces of paper over on the table over there. And I have a personal request that if anybody wishes to make any comments, they spell their names, print them out rather than writing them. That will make it much easier for everybody to deal with. Is there anyone among the people who are present who has a desire to make a comment about anything not on the record? Going once, going twice? Okay. So now we will move to our consent calendar and to the minutes of our last meeting. Typically that doesn't involve any discussion. If anybody would like to move to approve the calendar, I would ask you indicate by saying so moved.
So moved.
Okay, a second?
Yes.
Okay, so it's been moved by Commissioner Mensinger and seconded by Commissioner Roach that we approve the minutes of our last meeting. So Stephanie, can we have I'll call the vote.
Commissioner Disney. Aye. Commissioner Ahi.
Yes.
Commissioner Roach.
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger.
Yes.
Commissioner Beninato.
Yes.
Commissioner Steinle.
Yes. Okay, and that brings us to the substantive item, is item number 2, which is basically the objective standards for parking proposed by staff. And we will begin with a presentation by Nick Zorns. I assume, Nick, you're going to be doing the presentation. Okay, Nick will do the presentation, and that will be followed by any questions from the commissioners that are technical questions to clarify aspects of that. That will be followed by any comments from members of the public who may wish to speak to that. And again, I remind you about the speaker card, and followed by the commission discussing and ultimately voting on the proposal. So, Nick, if you're ready.
Yep, I am. All right, so good evening, commissioners. Tonight we're here to discuss and review a comprehensive parking code amendment, which I am titling 1.0 because there will be subsequent parking modifications made in the coming months, and even more closer towards mid to late this year with our comprehensive downtown parking strategy, which is currently underway with a third-party consultant. However, I will at least preface before I begin that is not included in any of the amendments tonight because that is going to take several months of outside third-party consultation and support for city staff. So tonight, as lightly discussed already, the zone text amendments that are before the Planning Commission is to implement the housing element programs 1I, 3A, and 3M. I'm going to go over those more in depth on following slides. As the loose background for anybody that is here in the chambers or for online is that this amendment proposed are necessitated by the sixth cycle adopted housing element, which almost a year ago we adopted at the city council level and has been something that we are diligently implementing over the last 12 months. The comprehensive code update for the parking standards, which is chapter 1474, will incorporate a complete reorganization of the chapter. The reason why that's important, at least to acknowledge, is that if you were to look at the actual proposed amendments to the municipal code, the entire chapter is red. However, there is a big amount of the wording and the text that exists that already has been in the code. It's just moving up the chapter to the more readily available and kind of in your face, which makes sense with the headers and the subsections of each chapter to make sure that you're not missing provisions of the code because some of the particulars are kind of buried under the existing zoning. Additionally, this is some of the very specific requirements that were incorporated in our sixth cycle housing element is that we are incorporating specialized parking ratios to incentivize downtown lot consolidation. We have an incorporation of multifamily residential parking ratios. Those are non-negotiable as those are state standard ratios that we explicitly incorporated into our housing element. So those were brought into this code cycle amendment. The incorporation of emergency shelter parking ratios. This is for consistency with state law. And then also to provide reduced parking ratios specifically for affordable housing units or BMRs, below market rate units. Single room occupancy or SROs, which are essentially very small efficiency units, so to speak, as rentals. Specifically senior housing development, and then supportive and transitional housing. So there's very specific reduced parking ratios for those specialized housing types. This is an important slide that I think we do have to at least acknowledge is that for a long time the city has had some form and way of a practice to do some zoning implementation, but it hasn't been a standardized procedural kind of component that's been codified into the zoning code. And the bullet points that follow that I'll cover briefly are things that now incorporate standard practices into the zoning code instead of arbitrarily applying it on a project by project basis. Rather than creating an equal playing field for any housing development that were to occur. Those things are something that also includes the mechanical lift parking systems, loading and unloading zones to be able to have that more standard and universal, tandem parking dimensions, compact parking dimensions, entry gates, and associated staging areas. I will at least point out that is actually something that's come up 3 times in my time here, the last year and a half as the director and department head, where we have not had suitable provisions to be able to guide request for essentially privatizing and fencing off communal areas for essentially small PUDs in town, where they would have essentially had overflow of this, what we call staging areas, or essentially how the cars line up until the entrance of the entry feature. So it is important that we obviously create some form and some regulations around that that allow for us to actually regulate. Parking area landscape requirements. This is obviously something that's been brought up a lot over the last almost a year of doing housing element implementation. There's some requirements that we do have in our code loosely that talk about providing landscape buffer areas, but there are some specific requirements that I have now integrated into our code to, again, create a standard and an equal playing field for any proposed development. And then obviously there are some recent discussions surrounding dark skies, which is to incorporate the basic principles of what a dark sky ordinance standalone would actually do. And there's the opportunity for us to create standards such as shielding downwards and using the right intentional lighting fixtures around a site in order to be able to make sure that we support the principles of a dark sky ordinance moving forward in other amendments that will be forthcoming in the coming months. The conversion of parking ratio requirements. So I do want to at least point this out because, again, the parking amendments in this ordinance look a lot more substantive than they actually are. If you were to sit down and reconcile what is actually proposed in the zoning parking ratio table or matrix, the parking ratios haven't increased or changed for uses other than obviously explicitly for the ones that I notated earlier in the presentation for the specialized housing. But for our non-residential uses, we haven't increased or decreased really for anything. However, if you actually looked and compiled the parking ratio requirements, is we actually probably, if I went back, we have around 20 and some change standard parking ratios that are integrated into our code. And then there's other provisions that just say, upon the review of the commission, we'll approve a parking ratio for very specific non-residential uses. Based on ILG, or the Institute of Land, of Governments, there are specific ratio standards for very specific uses that are kind of more general in nature that we've integrated as a best practice, as well as what is in our regional kind of network of looking at and comparing, contrasting to some of our neighboring jurisdictions and integrating those for standard ratios that we really should have already had in our code for several years, but have fallen short. So that will then integrate and standardize that as well. And then that kind of covers the main meat and potatoes of what this ordinance actually does in enacting, but I am going to at least inform the commission as well as the public, and I will be repeating this to the city council moving forward. But on December 21st, myself as the Development Services Director received correspondence from the Housing and Community Development Department from the Proactive Enforcement Unit. This is the unit that I have discussed briefly to the community over the last year and a half since I've been with the city. The Proactive Enforcement Unit is something that was just given power within the last 2 to 3 years at HCD. They have proactive enforcement capabilities to be able to bring suit against a city, and they no longer have to tap into the AG in order to do so. We received a letter of inquiry from the Proactive Enforcement Unit regarding the status of our rezone. Our rezonings, as I've previously talked about under the last 2 large batches of amendments with the commission and the council, were statutorily required of us by the end of this month or January 31st, 2024. I have already transmitted correspondence to HCD telling them that we have already done all of our required rezoning when it comes to the actual change of the land use in and of itself. And I'm just waiting on further correspondence of them confirming and accepting that as I've transmitted our ordinances and resolutions that have also been produced by the city. And what's important to note is that the city took final action in doing our rezonings on November 28th, so just over a month ago now. And as of last week, all zoning changes have become operative and are now effective past the 31st date of the last final action of the city. Something else I do want to at least touch on, because now we're coming up on a year of our final kind of big action as a city, which was the main adoption of the 6-cycle housing element. Of the 16 jurisdictions in the county of Santa Clara at the time of this report, and still as of today, 7 jurisdictions are in compliance with housing element law, meaning 7 jurisdictions in the county are certified. As of September 5th, the day that we were certified by the state of California, we were made the 6th jurisdiction. So there's only been one that has subsequently come after us and received certification. That means over half of the county is still in builder's remedy territory, and we are at least safe harbored today. So with that, the Planning Commission recommendation from staff is to provide the City Council with the proposed amendments provided tonight, where they will then introduce and then subsequently adopt the draft ordinance that is before you tonight. And I am available for clarifying questions.
Okay, thank you, Nick, and thank you for the hard work you and your staff put into putting this together. It really was an impressive piece of work. As all of our objective standards have turned out to be. What I'm going to do there are 13 new sections here, and I think what I'm going to do is group them and invite questions as to those particular sections as we go through. It might be quicker than saying, does anybody have any questions? And we can just work through it that way. And the first group that I'm going to propose is, I'm just going to do the sections, so it's 0.010, et cetera. 010, 020, 030, 040, and 050. They're on pages 17, 18, and 19 of the packet materials. And those are just sort of general things there before we get to the actual standards. So does anybody have any questions relating to those?
Actually, can I ask a more general
Yeah.
question?
Sure.
Thank you, Nick, for all this, and I realize, these are all things that we just need to do, but I just have kind of a bigger question. We don't have parking and lieu fees here, and it's something that's come up in many discussions with developers who have kind of indicated maybe that's a way to go. Does any of this impact the ability, if the city council should decide to do something about parking and lieu fees?
No, so there's there are going to be certain projects that will essentially always be protected by the fact that we will not be able to allow or require a parking in lieu because of some of the recent state laws that have come into play. But it's not a blanket for the entire city in regards to land use. The city, as I kind of previously discussed, is that we are currently underway with doing our comprehensive downtown parking strategy, which is definitely our biggest pinch point and when it comes to community concern for parking. And that is something that we are looking at as a part of the essentially alternative or a potential remedy to any potential kind of impact that might be associated. But this ordinance will not circumvent us from taking a further action. We just have to kind of look at it more holistically and see there might be multiple levels of an in lieu fee to establish depending on what area of the city of it is in, and kind of go from there.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So back to those sections. If there are any questions there, if anybody has, let us know. Otherwise, we'll move on.
I just have general questions as well about the just kind of the whole report. Can you guys hear me?
No, that's better.
Okay, that's better.
Yeah.
Okay, so in the report, it says that there's going to be a comprehensive downtown parking plan, and a consultant's going to be hired, and I think towards the end of the year, that's expected to be completed. And so my question is, with that plan, will there be a more, I guess, comprehensive assessment as to what the parking needs are in downtown? Because the report, I think the housing element says that the city will do this assessment, and I just want to clarify, is the assessment on parking needs that comprehensive downtown plan?
Yeah, so the assessment of the downtown parking demand and needs is going to be based on their. I mean, they actually already did in December. The community was just some people actually asked them in the field what they were doing, because there were people doing vehicle counts, which is obviously kind of a little weird in Los Altos to have people kind of walking behind your car every so often. And so that actually took place under 3 separate days at what we already know is our busiest time of year. So to say any data in the future would be skewed is actually totally the opposite. We kind of picked the most conservative method of doing the parking calculations and counts at the time. But so they're looking at obviously the actual demand that's going on today in real time. They will look at and assess our code, what our actual ratio requirements are for all of the prescribed uses, specifically non-residential and then the residential ones. They'll look at what's already been built out. They'll look at what's been approved, and then they'll look at some of our existing kind of, buildings that, already have a demand on the network as it is. And there will be a big comprehensive kind of analysis of all of those different particulars. Now, with a downtown parking strategy, kind of almost with any type of transportation analysis, is as the process is going, it does become somewhat iterative if there's certain kind of initial conclusions or findings that have been made that we might have to modify and amend the contract or the scope of the work if we start seeing that there's a trend coming and that we want to dig into some more details to be able to make sure that we actually do a full comprehensive analysis. As I kind of have mentioned previously to the city council, is there's actually been multiple iterations of a downtown parking study or strategy dating all the way back to 1987. So we actually have 4 almost very comprehensive kind of plans that just were never really carried across the finish line. So we actually have some parking statistics and data all the way back from well over 30 years ago. So we're going to be able to holistically kind of peel back some of those layers and really see what's kind of evolved and changed even since that time frame, because obviously land use has changed in downtown. So we'll kind of be going over that kind of on a bigger level. Now, the program that was identified in the housing element that does talk about, it was initially written based on community response, desire, and feedback to essentially only be originally it was worded to be prepare a downtown parking plan, and that was it. HCD did not accept that. HCD required really of us to expand it to update citywide parking requirements, and that's one of the reasons why then the specific requirement to have the multifamily residential requirement changed throughout all districts. That's really kind of the big meat and potatoes. So we actually have done that component by virtue of implementing this ordinance, because as if you look at in the red lines, there's probably 5 different subsections in this chapter that have different multifamily parking ratios or slightly different in all of them, but it's districts that are immediately adjacent to each other, and you would have no idea which district you're in versus not. And so it was to really kind of create what the matrix table ends up being is you don't really account for, unless you have a true parking district, you don't really do different parking ratios for use unless you have an established specific defined parking district. You don't do it in a zoning district. Those are 2 very different things. So you have a standard use ratio, and that's applicable throughout the city unless you have, like in, I mean, honestly, all of our immediate downtowns, Mountain View, Palo Alto, Los Altos, Burlingame, you then have a parking district that then has some very specific requirements because the demand of transportation is a lot more high. And so there's a lot of nuances to it. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why there's a lot that we've already done with just this at a front level for the citywide requirement. There's more of an outside consultation for the downtown requirement because that's essentially a downtown parking district that never really was finalized and carried across the finish line, even back in the 50s and 60s when the parking plazas were really established.
Okay, I think a lot of what you said is really conveyed here, and I think this is really a great improvement to what is existing. But with the downtown comprehensive plan, it's specific to downtown, and after that plan is completed and reviewed, then that would involve another amendment to 14.74. But specific to just downtown uses. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, I fully anticipate that because that's generally what would happen with that type of a study is we would, I mean, in theory, our code would already look the way that it's being proposed tonight. And then we would just amend or add in some things and fold in kind of some incentivization of, being able to use a blended rate for parking to be able to, not really hinder, potential non-residential development, so on and so forth. So there's kind of we're kind of just kind of cleaning up our act before we actually go down that path because inevitably, a lot of what's being proposed is really kind of just folding back in some of our practices that we've been doing for years. I know even some of my staff kind of initially asked, well, how are you going to structure a lot of this? And it was peeling back the layers of looking what we've been doing for like the last decade plus on a project by project basis, because I know we've thought that that's the warm fuzzy for some of our project by project one-offs, but every single time we're almost applying the same type of level of either scrutiny or requirements that we don't have codified yet, but that we just keep on reinventing. So at some point, that's when you bake it in and fold it in and say, no, this is the city standard. This is what we expect. This is what we want to see.
Yeah, okay, two more really quick questions. Oh, sure, yes, of course.
I took this, Nick, as basically what people do this sort of thing called enabling legislation, which is to say that it sets up the framework for things, and then there's going to be some more specific work later on. Would that be a fair way of describing it?
Yeah, that's a good way to say it.
So our concern this evening is the framework and not specific details. Sorry.
Right.
Except for the details that are there. I mean, we're concerned with those details.
Right, but this is a work in progress. So.
Excuse me, Commissioner Steinle, could you use your
Yeah,
mic?
Sorry, I
Thank
turned
you.
it off so I wouldn't interrupt anybody. Okay.
Chair
so-
Steinle, I
yeah.
should have said.
That's okay. All right. So with that, okay, you.
Okay,
yep.
two more quick ones.
Mhm.
Does the comprehensive downtown parking plan tap the expertise of an arborist? Or is it only looking at, the needs of parking?
So it's only the needs of parking. However, the city council has already discussed doing an urban forest master plan, which has not begun at this particular time. However, in October of late last year, we applied under the sustainability division that's in the development services department for a sizable grant that would actually pay for a lump sum of the urban forest master plan, which would actually account for an overall analysis of existing tree canopy and then best practices as well as amendments to the municipal code to be able to further improve the tree canopy within the city.
That's awesome. Okay, and then finally, you mentioned dark skies. Do we have, you mentioned dark skies and kind of basic principles, but do we actually, can we get standards and best practices? I mean, because principles, that's kind of a little fuzzy, but, what are are there best practices that certain municipalities are doing that we can look at and maybe copycat?
So the environmental commission was already tasked with that from the city council. They're either bringing that next Monday at their regularly scheduled meeting or in February. I'm not sure exactly where their ad hoc subcommittee stands, if they were bringing it or not, to the next week's meeting. However, that is what they're talking about. The reason why I incorporated some lighting performance standards in here is because when I was crafting the ordinance, I took the opportunity to know that we have discussed at the CSC in the last year and a half, as well as at the Planning Commission, is about lighting standards in regards to kind of some of our parking areas. And so I knew that it was something that we wanted to discuss anyways, or make sure that was incorporated as a zoning standard, so that projects could be upfront in compliance and not, again, not one-offs, or something that we can't apply after the fact because it's not in our code. So when I say it in the PowerPoint is that it's a principle, it's that I want to at least acknowledge is that I specifically put in some provisions that are based on the principles of dark skies. However, that ordinance is currently under research with the Environmental Commission and will be returning back to the City Council for further direction once we have kind of initial scope from the Environmental Commission.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Joe? No? Okay.
Quick one.
Okay, sure.
I just was wondering, and maybe this was already stated, but is the downtown parking plan, is there going to include an analysis of the properties that can't develop due to the parking that's required? So like a lot of properties along Main Street and State Street, they can't physically develop because of the parking requirements. Is that going to be part of the analysis? I forget if...
So yes and no. So the city, there's a long-standing history with how the city parking plazas became into the city's ownership in its full totality, and it was by essentially. Don't get upset, Jolie. Somewhat of an agreement and a partnership with the original landowners that owned the majority of the land in downtown. And then the parking plazas were essentially saying, hey, we know that we're going to need parking in the future. We will essentially relinquish control over this. The city will assume responsibility, ownership, so on and so forth. There's some nuances to that in regards to all of what we know as the parking plazas today. But that's really, those have, and they've already been protected under the zoning code, is the square footage that exists on the sites today are allowed to continue or rebuild that amount of square footage tomorrow, essentially, and not have to park it. In the future, if they wanted to propose a new development, there potentially could be somewhat of a limitation on the redevelopment opportunity, I guess you could say, if they weren't to do lot consolidation, which is one of the reasons why there was the program for lot consolidation, which is specific, is that you'll see is that there is only one parking stall per unit, even if it's market rate, for any proposed development that provides lot consolidation, which would really be a benefit to State and Main Street potential. However, myself as well as the deputy director, we have both visited together a site in Burlingame that is using a very interesting automated parking system. And these are becoming more and more popular for properties specifically like this, where you don't have to have the turnarounds and everything. It's a mechanicalized system, essentially, that's all controlled by AI. And it works. Weirdly, it's kind of trippy, I'm not gonna lie, but it actually does. But we're in the heart of Silicon Valley, and if we're not willing to adopt something that allows for that, then we're probably living in the wrong area anyways. But those parking systems do create the allowance for tightly developed or segmented lots to be able to still provide parking. So I do think we're going to have that opportunity, but as well as we do have the mechanism as well built in for things such as license agreements, so on and so forth. So we do have that opportunity in other things that we're crafting into this code as well. But I do kind of, as that is the backstory, I do think that the parking study will provide some analysis and recommendation on that. But again, that's going to be something that if they find early on that we need to dive a little bit deeper into, we will do so.
All right. Then with that, the next set has to do with the specific standards. Section 060 has the development standards themselves.
Can I get clarification? You know, are we gonna go back and discuss each section, or we just?
We're just doing questions right
Okay,
now.
all right.
Discussion is later, okay?
Okay.
The question should be to clarify what's here. We can discuss other points at the discussion section. So, yes, I think the answer to your question is yes.
Okay.
Okay. So I just want to make sure that nobody has anything that they're unsure of in terms of this, and that's the purpose of the questions. So I want to look at 060 and 070. 060 is the development standards in general, and 070 begins to look at alternative standards, and then there are some more specific things later on. So does anyone have any questions that were raised by those sections? Any of the 060 and 070? Because I do have a couple of questions myself, but no, you go ahead.
Okay, so I think it'd be nice if we had, I don't know if this is the time to say this. I don't know if it's
It's questions, not comments.
Questions, not comments. So
Okay, so
it would not be wrong to bring it up later
Okay.
if you're not sure.
let me, you know what, if you could just answer the question quickly, because I know sometimes.
Excuse me. Could you guys use their microphones?
Sorry about that. Is there a place where decorative concrete is defined?
No, there's not.
Okay, because it's not clear to me what that is. There's also a line on page 4 of 19, item 3. I had a really hard time understanding that, and I'm wondering what that actually means.
Which page are you on?
I'm
Are you-
page 4 of 19.
Right, but what subsection?
Okay, let me give you the full
The
subsection.
additional minimum standards?
14.74.060.
Right,
C, which is
Okay.
paving materials.
right.
Item 3.
Okay, all right, so that's on page 30.
Bottom and fourth.
Yeah.
I just had a
mhm,
hard time really understanding what that's saying.
Okay,
So I don't know if it was just me or if the staff wants to
that's
enlighten.
exactly what we're doing here, is finding that
Okay,
kind of thing out.
good.
Yes. Mhm.
So what is your question about that you're not understanding paving materials? I guess just can you further clarify what you mean you're not understanding about it?
Okay, so concrete entry areas of any parking facility shall be provided in any required setback area or a minimum of the first 20 feet of depth of any parking facility, whichever is greater.
So there's some there's going to be some parking districts, or not parking districts, zoning districts that are not going to have a front yard setback. Essentially, you're going to have 0 lot lines. And so with this, as I'm telling them, then if you have 0 lot lines, you have to provide at least the first 20 feet of your entry area for the driveway has to be made of decorative paving. It can't just be off the cuff, plain concrete and asphalt. That's very indicative of specifically the Stanford apartment complex that's built on El Camino in town. The first, essentially 50% of the driveway area is all kind of more of a decorative paving, pavers for all extensive purposes. However, there are going to be some potential districts in town that have a 25-foot setback, and so it's either going to be the setback that's established that's the number that's greater, or essentially the 20 is minimum. So that's just how we would write it in order to make sure that we legally can obtain at least 20 feet of the depth, or if there's a setback that's with greater depth, then we get that. So it's just that's what we're obtaining out of it.
Okay, so it's basically saying the entry has to be decorative paving. Well, actually, it doesn't say that the entry has to be decorative paving. It says decorative paving or concrete entry areas.
So just I think the idea is it marks the entrance, and it has to be set back as far as we can make it be set back.
I don't think I guess I'm not convinced it actually says that, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. I think it's confusing the way it's written, because it doesn't, if concrete entry areas shall be provided in any required setback.
Kate, is your question that it doesn't explicitly say decorative?
That's correct.
which
It also,
really doesn't.
It really doesn't, and it also says as measured from the primary entrance into the required facility. It should be from the entrance to something else. So I just think that I get what you're saying, and I agree
the-
with what you're saying. I
the
just
wording
think it
needs
needs
to
to
be cleaned
be fixed,
Yeah,
yeah.
there are a number of spots
Yeah.
where it's not the substance, but the wording, and I think that we
Right.
can probably do those offline. Just to correct that.
What do you
the
mean
clarity.
offline?
Well, I mean, for example, on that same page, there are words that are misspelled, there are some words that are misused, things like that. They don't change the substance, it's just that the sentence could be made a complete sentence.
I'm confident the staff can change it, but I
Right.
just think we have to bring it up, because
Right.
if we don't, it may
Yeah, no,
not get
and,
fixed.
and that can be raised, yes, right. Okay, and that can be cleaned up.
Okay.
Okay, you just signal and we can clean it up. Okay. Any other questions on these? I have a couple if, yeah,
I might make a comment concerning the last
okay,
thing. In C number 2, it says decorative paving or decorative concrete
mhm,
shall be provided. Whereas in 3, they left out.
Microphone, please.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys. I can't hear you.
Sorry, Joe. You're locked in your room.
Yeah.
In item 3, it says decorative paving or concrete. It just, the word decorative concrete, decorative was left out.
Yeah.
It's in the previous.
That's my point, is
Yeah.
that there are some editorial things that can just, that will clarify things. I don't think that it goes to the substance of it at all. Okay. Any other questions? I have a couple on this. On that same page, and it's at the top of the page, and so this is A1 and then A, has to do with the size of the parking stalls, and you have them 18 feet long, and what I'm thinking here is that it might make more sense to, or did we think about doing them as 20 feet, which is the ADA required length for a handicap thing? And I'm asking this because in some circumstances, non-handicap stalls can be converted to handicap stalls in some places, and if we're allowing for maneuvering and that sort of thing, 20 feet is a lot longer than 18 feet for some of these. Did we think about that, or is that something that we need to worry about here? I know because we have actually done this where we convert things, and in order for it to be ADA compliant, which it would have to be, we'd have to make sure that we have 20 feet clearance for the length of the stall. Is that
So I did look at especially because obviously, creating a standard compact stall dimension, when obviously looking at what our neighboring jurisdictions are doing for that, also seeing that 9 by 18 is kind of a really, I don't want to say it's universal, but it's very common, is 9 by 18 for standard parking stalls.
right?
And the reason why I would say that probably is because people still haven't really wanted to make a big change when it comes to the maneuvering areas. So like the drive aisles, like really shrinking those down to a more acceptable, considering now we have, a lot of people have cars with sensors and backup cameras, so they're able to maneuver a lot more freely and traverse in tighter underground garages, essentially. So until we probably do that, I wouldn't recommend changing the stall dimensions, because we're going to have to then take that into account as well. And that's one of those things where I think we would need kind of to use maybe some, garage modeling, with a parking consultant, just to really kind of make sure we understand what we're doing when it comes to the modification of the stall requirements. Again, I'm fine with bringing that back up again, as like what I said, this is parking, code updates 1.0. But I actually didn't modify our standard stall dimension or our driveway aisles at this time, because that's going to take a little bit more close, look at some things.
Yeah, the purpose of my question was to get that back on the radar scope, because 9 by 18 was the old ADA requirement until 2010, and then it was increased to 9 by 20. So, and that could be a problem for the owners later on if they're having to modify things. So that's just something we should consider, and whether we care or not is another question, but that's something I'd like to see on the thing. And then in the next line, it talks about the parking standards. Parking Standards Exhibit A, is that something that exists, or is that something that's going to exist?
No, this is something that exists. This is something that's been previously referred to in the code. In full transparency, the city was sued. We have lost previously by just referencing the exhibit in and of itself, and actually not the dimensions of of what's incorporated from the exhibit. We are now memorializing and cleaning up the sins of the past.
Okay, all right. And then on the next page, and this is sub E, this is E, and sub 1, it talks about the water efficient standards, water efficient landscape. And again, is this something that we already have, or is this something that's going to be done as part of the ongoing project?
Water efficient landscape requirements were something that was actually passed into law under Jerry Brown. Okay. So this is something that's been a long-standing thing that all cities have to comply with. And so we already have that. This is just making essentially a subtle reference to that any of the landscaping that's proposed for parking also has to, adhere to water efficient landscape requirements, as well as then the arboricultural best practices to make sure that we're not overplanting, which is obviously a very common occurrence in town.
Yeah. Okay, so it's state law. Okay, all right. That,
Before we move, I would like to bring up something on that page.
Okay.
And I think it'd be better to address it
as a question as opposed
yeah,
to...
as a
okay.
question. But I don't want to jump in if someone had some.
No, I think you jump.
Okay, jump. So in that same section, it says that a landscape buffer of at least 5 feet in depth will be required to shield the surface parking from adjacent properties. And I'm wondering, I guess, where the 5 feet came from, because I went out and I measured the wells in the parking, the parking lots, the city-owned parking lots, and the only wells that have trees in them are 6 feet by 7 feet. So I don't know where the 5 feet came from. It seems like it's a little bit shallow if you're trying to get screening trees like Chinese pistache and other category 2 trees.
So the 5 feet is a really common number in other jurisdictions. That's where it came from, and that's from having someone plant the tree that actually knows how to plant a tree. Trees can't just go into the ground, and you have to plant them at the right depth and not have anything that's impacted or compacted soil issues, essentially. And we have a lot of that around town from the mixture of geological deposit that we have in Los Altos. So, I mean, the 5 feet is sufficient. In other cities that have been doing street trees for, the actual planned tree wells. So that's where that number has come from. Okay. So, and again, yeah, it is an at least 5 feet. So essentially we're setting a minimum, not a ceiling.
Okay, so, I mean, my view is it's a little skimpy based on what I'm seeing in downtown, because the wells that are not 6 by 7 feet only have an oleander in them. And I don't know if that's because a tree didn't do well in the smaller wells. But I do want to say that if 5 feet is the minimum, and that's a strip, meaning that tree that's in the 5 foot strip has 5 feet by a lot more in the other dimension because it's a strip.
I think this is getting into discussion. We can bring this back up, but
Well,
unless there's a question.
It's going
specific
to lead to a question.
Okay.
So if 5 feet is the minimum for a strip, why then would the diamond be 4 feet by 4 feet? I don't know how you're going to get a tree to thrive, a big tree to thrive in a 4 feet by 4 feet diamond when we don't have that currently in downtown. We don't have anything growing in such a small diamond currently.
So if the only rebuttal that I can have to it is if the only consideration that we have is on public city land, is I wouldn't I wouldn't really use that as a really good representation. What I would be more concerned with is setting a minimum requirement that people are going to waive the requirement in the future, which is what we most commonly have seen over the last several years. Is we have to set realistic minimums that aren't going to just get waived with the magic wand of density bonus. So when it's things that are on public land that we own, we have control to be able to listen and heed the desires of the community more than we do on private development. But private developers and anything that has a sufficient amount of housing related to it, they have the upper hand in land use now. So I don't think it's advisable to try and set it, because I think I'm going to end up having to report back out that we're not able to even negotiate a realistic outcome from the developer's standpoint, to be honest.
All right, any other questions on that? Okay, the remaining portions are 080, 090, 100, and 110, which have to do with mixed-use parking requirements, loading facilities, downtown parking, and common parking facilities, after which it's the substantive parts pretty much come to an end. Are there any questions on those sections? Anything that comes out of
Did
those?
you say 090?
Yeah, 080, 090, which is loading facilities, 100, which is downtown parking, and 110, which is common parking facilities. Those go together. And then the last two are not associated with that
Okay.
directly.
Well, I have a question about loading facilities.
Okay.
That section 090 says, talks about how to accommodate the delivery of shipping of goods. And, I understand having a loading facility is nice, but is it always going to be something that is required? Because I was having a hard time understanding, like, why would this be necessary for all sites? And if we are requiring it everywhere, then we're just paving over what could be softscape and trees. And so I'm wondering, is there some language here to look to that indicates when a loading facility is going to be required for a project?
So loading facilities has been something that's been regularly required by various commissions on various different projects, whether or not it's residential standalone, mixed use, as well as non-residential development. I will say there is some benefit to requiring, I'm not saying an extensive loading facility, but I will say we have had some significant challenges and hurdles when permitting things such as encroachment permits for people that are moving into some very nice condos on El Camino Real that can't get a semi into an underground parking garage and can't park a pod on a Caltrans thoroughfare. So not having something that's on site that's somewhat designed, it doesn't have to be robust. It does limit even residential that you wouldn't really think about deliveries, so on and so forth. You also have to envision is that loading facilities oftentimes are multi-purposed in regards to the pickup and collection of recycling and garbage facilities. That's what we've seen a lot of. So 330 Distal is a good representation of something that kind of has a blend. Theirs is a little bit uncharacteristically not as specific as this code section is, because they did deviate a little bit, which was allowed under density bonus. So there's some nuances to it, but there's also just been the genuine consideration of wanting to make sure that there's not just a bleed over of loading facilities into the public right of way, because then that will impede bicycle and pedestrian safety, because you can't have a loading zone immediately adjacent to the sidewalk if we're then trying to plan for complete streets throughout the city. So there's kind of inter-commission kind of priorities where if the if the planning commission wants to undo loading facilities, I suspect the city council will add back in exactly what is proposed here. This isn't really a deviation from anything that we haven't been doing over the last several years. And that's because of the Complete Streets Master Plan, the desire to have loading facilities provided on site because of the implications to our Complete Streets Master Plan and things of that nature.
Okay, just to clarify, if you build a project with underground parking and a box truck can drive down underneath the building and pull into, I guess, a loading zone next to an elevator, is that, would that be an adequate loading facility? Is that kind of like what we're visioning here?
I mean, that could, I guess, but we don't have a single development in the city of Los Altos that accommodates anything above a normal pickup truck to enter into a below grade parking facility. They have to have, I'm thinking of 4350, they have something that's immediately adjacent to the entry of their underground parking facility that is essentially an extra wide drive aisle that the extra wide portion stays above grade to be able to have a loading facility at grade because you can't get semi-size or even the mini, semi-type trucks for deliveries and things below grade because of the ingress and egress of the grade change. So it's really not feasible and practical. So that's actually a project specifically that designed it where they do have an on-site loading facility, and that also will interchangeably be used as their garbage collection. So on garbage day, the dumpsters are rolled out into the loading facility and then not onto El Camino Real, which we actually do have a problem with some of our developments that have occurred in town where they have to push them on into what currently is an on-street parking facility.
Kate, can I ask a clarifying
Yes.
question of you? When you first asked your question, I got the sense that you were concerned that we were going to pave over things that could be landscaped. Is that what directed your concern?
Well, D does say a loading facility may be located in the front yard setback, but
So-
shall comply with other
So
required
it's not with
setbacks.
the idea of having a loading zone, it's the idea that the loading zone could take away from something you would find more aesthetically
Yeah, it's
pleasing.
kind of like be careful what you wish for. Like, of course, we want everything and we want
Okay.
a loading zone,
That's, I
but
think, something that we'll want to take up in the
but
discussion.
yeah.
I agree, I
Yeah,
just wanted to
yeah, no,
understand
no,
what
yeah,
Kate,
and-
her
and I-
question was phrased real
Very,
well.
very good, yes.
I think there was a
So-
lot of other discussion which
Yeah.
didn't directly
So
tie
we'll
to-
take this back up during the discussion, okay, if you want to talk about that. But you got the answer to your question, which is that it is basically a requirement. And I will say from my own experience, because we're the ones who pile our recycling and our trash on the street, because we don't have one, it is absolutely necessary. And even vans don't fit down into the garage. So the idea that you're going to be able to get to the low-grade parking areas with any kind of a pickup or delivery, right, it just doesn't happen because there's just not enough clearance. So that basically there is no good solution, and this is the only one that's available. So. But we'll get back into that if we want to in the discussion. Are there any other questions, Maros, Richard?
Sorry, I had
Yeah.
one under the downtown lot consolidation. Was there any thought by staff to add more incentives to that other than just the one parking stall per unit?
Yes, so that's again, that won't really be necessarily something that's explicit. I mean, we might come up with something a little bit more in the future for incentivization of lot consolidation, but that will live in different chapters. So we have to remember we're living in parking right now. There's probably not much more we're going to be able to do necessarily other than just waive parking altogether for the entire redevelopment, which I don't think we're going to probably get across a finish line. But we will do other incentives in other areas of the zoning code, and even probably just policy decisions of the council where One will also be is lot consolidation will have fee waivers or a zero cost fee associated with lot consolidation for downtown parking for the small segmented lots. So yes, but not in this ordinance.
Okay. Richard, any questions? Nope. Joe, question? Nope.
No questions yet.
Okay, all right. Then the remaining two things are, one is the authorization, this is 120, authorization to execute agreements, which I will just point out as part of Nick's continuing effort to consolidate all power in the Community Services Department. And finally, then the meat of this, which is the parking ratio chart, which is part of section 130. And I do have a question about one section in there, and I'll just lead off because it's just a simple one. Under multiple family housing, that's on the second page of the chart, and you have the studios, and then the next line is 0 to 1 bedrooms. Isn't the 0 bedrooms also the same thing as a studio, or is there a particular reason why essentially we're saying the same thing twice repeatedly?
To make sure there's an abundantly clear acknowledgement that a developer could design something that is considered a 0-bedroom unit and is not defined as a studio because of conflicting definitions in the building code and in someone's local zoning code. I would like to retain both. I will acknowledge prior jurisdiction I have worked for was sued into submission for not having it called out as a studio, and HCD opined on it, and we had to waive all parking for the studio because of the way our code was crafted. So this at least crosses our T's and dots the I's.
I figured it was something like that, but I wanted to clarify. I think in terms of sleeping spaces rather than bedrooms, it makes it somehow make more sense, but unfortunately our legislature doesn't think that way. Okay, are there any other questions about any of the details? Joe has a question, okay. Joe, then you get to go.
Great. Director Zorns, I just had a question about the rounding of the 0.5. So up above in 130 section A little 3, it talks about, rounding up if 0.5 or higher. And in the chart, I was a little confused about, the examples. For example, for a multifamily dwelling unit, 2 to 3 bedroom unit, it specifies 1.5 stalls per unit. So how do you put in 1.5 stalls? Would that round up to 2, or like, why wouldn't we just call out 2 there if that's what we're doing?
No, so for example, if you build a triplex and all 3 of the units are 3-bedroom units, you're going to be at a parking stall requirement of 4.5. Subsection 3, as you've notated, would then say the comprehensive parking requirement for the site is 5. So it's you're talking about rounding it up on a unit by unit basis, and you don't round up until you do the cumulative parking demand for the site. So
Okay.
the rounding up is when you get the factor of all units combined.
All right. Is that obvious to everyone, or is that spelled out somewhere? That's probably just how it's normally done, right?
That's state law.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's also
It's
state law. It's also state law. This isn't
Okay.
density bonus law, that sort of thing. That's
Well,
required.
So at no point would we be specifying a half of a stall. It would always round up or round down depending on the situation.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was my question. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
I do have one more.
Okay.
This kind of goes back to the question about definitions. Do we have a definition anywhere of extensive retail versus intensive? I mean, because they do have different parking requirements.
Let me just double check really quick because I wrote this on a cruise ship, um, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and I believe we do. I will say that is a not common. Yes, we do. It's in our general definition section in zoning under chapter 14.02, article 2, which is all of the general definitions. So it defines what retail uses are, and then explicitly further goes into more detail about extensive retail use and intensive retail use.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, now it's all as clear as mud. All right. Okay. I love parking ratios. That's my favorite thing. I really do like that. Oh, yeah. Okay. All right. So the next thing would be if there are any comments from members of the public present. We can only take comments from members of the public who are present. Anybody who is watching on Zoom or YouTube, unfortunately, we have a card. Okay. So watching on Zoom or YouTube is sorry. Okay, is unfortunately not going to be able to participate until the council allows us to do that, and for the moment they're not. So I do have one card for it, and I thank Angela Adams for printing her name. It makes it much easier for me to say it. Okay, so you come forward to the lectern. You'll have 3 minutes, and do I have to turn this on? I have to. Okay, so. Can you just speak in the mic for a second and?
Hello?
Okay, it works,
All
okay.
right.
And
Wonderful.
just before you start, we're all ready to get to the clock, okay. And I think you have a timer in front of you on the lectern.
I don't see it
Theoretically,
on.
it will count down. Oh.
Okay, yeah, no
you say-
problem.
Okay, all right.
I don't think
So,
I'll be very long anyways.
That's okay, you get 3 whole minutes.
Okay.
Okay, and start whenever you like.
Okay, I know you guys were talking more so on the parking garage, but I just want to emphasize a little bit on the housing elements, okay? And good evening, Chairman Steinley and Chairmans, Commissioners, I'm sorry. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Angela Adams, and I'm a field representative for Northern Cal Carpenters Union, Local 405, Santa Clara County. I stand before you today because you are updating the housing element. I would like to propose the inclusion of labor standards within your housing elements that encourage area standard wages, apprenticeship programs, employer provided health care, and local hiring. We have worked with surrounding cities, city housing elements that are examples for such encouraging language, like Santa Clara, Sunnyvale, Los Gatos, Capitola, Redwood City, Menlo Park, I hope I'm saying that right, Foster City, Daly City, and South San Francisco. This encouraging language is designed to uplift the members of the community so that they may live healthy, prosperous lives and help contribute to the local economy. These standards have significantly improved my life, and I believe extending these opportunities can positively impact others in the same way. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay. Anybody else before we pass on to the rest of our, this is going once, going twice? Okay. All right.
Should we mention that actually isn't on the agenda tonight?
The housing element?
Yeah, in terms of,
Well, we're discussing a part of it, but yeah. I
but
mean,
that particular,
yeah, that particular issue was not part of our agenda, but that's fine. All right. Okay, so what I'm going to propose now is a slight change to the way that we have done things. I'm going to want to start with a motion, and then we discuss the motion rather than having a discussion followed by a motion. If there are any friendly amendments during the time that we're doing it, we can accommodate those as we go along so that at the end we know what the motion is and we can go ahead and vote on it. So I'm going to invite a motion to approve the recommended text amendments as they may emerge from our discussion, because we're not done yet, implementing the sixth cycle housing element update by modifying the city's parking standards and comprehensively amending Chapter 14.74 of the municipal code, and recommending to the council that they consider and adopt the ordinance of the City Council of the City of Los Altos amending Chapter 14.74 of the Los Altos Municipal Code to implement programs 1I, 3A, and 3M of the sixth cycle housing element update. And also finding that the proposed amendments are exempt from environmental review under section 15061B3 of the CEQA guidelines. So, would anybody who would like to make that motion simply say so moved?
So moved.
Proposing, yeah, okay, all right. And is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved by Commissioner Broach and seconded by Commissioner Menzinger. And so now we can begin our discussion of that motion, along with any things that we might amend as we go along. Okay.
Could we
So-
just go section by section?
Well, I don't know that we need to do each section,
Well,
but.
then will you just say pass?
Yeah, no, I mean, if that makes some sense too, because they are separate issues in
Right.
each case. So 010,
But here we're asking for comments. We're
comment,
not
good
vote-
discussion.
We're
Yeah,
not
we're not voting,
on
we're not
each
voting
section.
on each section, no. We'll vote on
No,
the
no,
entire thing.
no, we're not
Yeah,
voting on
okay.
each
Right,
section, but
right.
we're maybe going to entertain amendments to.
Or
different
whatever,
sections.
yeah,
Yes.
discussion. So, would it bother you if we said did 010, 020, 030, and 040 as a group? Because we did questions on that group.
I just think it's easier to just do them one at a time, why
Fine.
jump around?
Fine, 010. Any
Microphone, please.
Any discussion of 010? The purpose and intent? Anything, anybody have anything to say?
Not on 010.
Okay, all right. How about 020, applicability, which carries on 010?
I do have a question, or just kind of a comment.
Okay, whatever.
I'm just wondering, and maybe the staff wants to weigh on this. Section D discusses commercial vehicles and trailers, and I'm just wondering why it isn't also addressing recreational vehicles. I don't know. It just seems to me that if we're gonna say that commercial vehicles can't be there unless they have a purpose for being there, I don't know why we wouldn't include other similar sized vehicles like recreational vehicles.
So we've loosely talked about this in the recent past with the city council. The commission and the council has previously been advised about the limitations and ramifications of placing any type of restrictions on recreational vehicles on public streets when you do not have sufficient amount of alternatives for them to go to. So this is something that we previously discussed when it was brought up after some discussion after we approved our 330 Distal project. And we are not in the position as a city to be able to play with fire with the constitutionality that has been previously argued in our neighboring jurisdictions. So we've learned from the past, and the city attorney can opine if she wants further on that, but it's not something that I'm willing to entertain further with staff discussion tonight. So I'm sorry, but we're not going to discuss that with RVs specifically. There's a lot of limitations around it that HCD has gone after jurisdictions for.
Okay. And also considering that part of the issue here is things like picking up and delivering, that really, I think, was the focus of this rather than just any vehicle. So, okay. Any other comments, Joe? Well, you wave your hand or something if it's not. I'll try to keep an eye on you. Okay. So the next one after that is 030, the site plan and permit, which is part of the administrative setup. Is there anyone who has any comment to make about that? Not hearing anything, then 040 is the general provisions. It includes accessibility, exclusivity, and avoiding any encroachment on the public right-of-way, which has to do with the transition between the property on which the parking is occurring and its circulation into the general traffic, if you will. So does anyone have anything that they would like to bring up, discuss with respect to that? No? Okay. 050 is access, and that sort of follows on the general provisions. Any discussion relating to that?
I'd like to bring up some items with access on
For
050.
050? Okay.
Okay, so here are my thoughts on this. AIA says when the primary building frontage is along a public street which causes safety concerns for ingress or egress to and from the site, the driveway may locate along the secondary building frontage. The paragraph before says the location of the driveway on a corner lot when a building site abuts two intersecting streets and a driveway is proposed, the driveway shall be located on the primary building frontage. And I was trying to kind of understand, like, why are we dictating where the driveway should be? Because I think many times where the driveway should be is based on kind of the DNA of the street and the pattern and the other developments that are around the building. So it may make sense to put the driveway on the secondary street, depending on how other things are developed.
And I think that's what this provides. I think that here the general tendency has been the primary street is the one that has the street address. So and the secondary street would not have the street address. This would allow the driveway to be on the secondary street if it were a corner lot, for example. So I think what it's doing is allowing exactly what you were talking about. It permits that to happen.
I don't think it actually does.
Why don't we ask Nick?
Yeah.
Sorry, I wasn't able to fully follow along with the kind of sidebar discussion a little bit. Sorry, can you repeat yourself?
Okay, so I live on a corner lot. And one of the great things about this neighborhood is there's a lot of garages in the rear and single-car garages. Because I'm on a corner, I didn't want to wreck my front yard with a driveway. And I just wanted all the pedestrian kind of elements on the front. And it was just the natural thing to put the driveway on the side street. And all the people that have corner lots have done this. The way this is written, it looks like I can only do that if there is safety concerns for ingress and egress. And I think it would make more sense, rather than making the decision based on safety, I mean, although that is a consideration, we should be looking at what is the prevailing pattern in the neighborhood and follow the prevailing pattern.
So your concern is with the word shall as opposed to making it more optional?
Right. I just think, why dictate where the driveway is on a corner lot? It should be based on what the pattern is in the neighborhood and what makes sense from the point of view of like improving the streetscape.
I mean, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I know there was a couple projects over the last few years on El Camino that were on corner lots, and I'm trying to remember which one it was, but I remember there was a safety concern as far as people getting in and out because it was very close to the edge. So I think in some cases there is a legitimate safety concern. I don't know. I think it's kind of vague to say that whatever's the prevailing traffic pattern of the area. That might be too vague because I think for that one it was based primarily on the safety of El Camino.
Which is a totally legitimate concern.
Yeah.
I just feel like what you just said,
me ask Nick,
it's the shall, right?
Nick, is there any reason not to allow the homeowner discretion with regard to where he places their driveway?
Other than in the last 6 months, we've dealt with this on a couple of projects in single-family districts that the neighbor has not enjoyed. Essentially the closer an encroachment from the side yard, which on a corner lot also can be someone's side/rear. And it ends up kind of impacting them, where then they end up hearing, seeing, or having a garage a lot closer. So it's, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not gonna split hairs over this with the commission or the council if I get pushback on it. So if a commission majority would like to modify this section, again, I'm not gonna split hairs on it, but I think from a best practice, this is something that I've seen in other jurisdictions near us, as well as in other jurisdictions I've worked for. So is to locate it on the primary building frontage, and let the exception result is if there's a safety concern. Generally, a circulation element will say that it has to be off of the lower classification of street. I do not want to get into that level. I want to provide a little bit of a flexibility where the city engineer, which that position is housed in the Development Services Department, would look at the site visibility triangle, and if they determine that visibility can be made from the alternative, then the alternative can be exercised. But I don't think it's necessarily. I think Commissioner Disney, you're correct in what some people in the community think, and then there's another chunk that don't like the that kind of site planning, which is what we've been seeing lately. So it's, again, commission can weigh in on it if you'd like to.
Any other thoughts? Anybody have anything to address, Richard? No, on that point, on that point.
I just want to say,
Yeah.
to the
Well-
extent anyone wants to make an amendment, I don't know if you do on this or not, do we do it now, or do you want to do it after we've gone through all the provisions?
We could do it as we go along, or we
I
could
think
do
that
it-
would make more
yeah,
sense, because
I
then we
did.
just kind of move.
I
Yeah,
agree.
right. So
He's
that,
keeping track.
I am. That's what I'm
Okay,
here
I'd
for.
like to make an amendment
Okay,
that
you propose
the
a
location of-
friendly amendment.
is
This would be
the-
in the form of a
yes.
friendly amendment. Otherwise, you'd have to make a motion
Right,
to
I
amend.
want to
and
make
that
a
would-
friendly amendment.
Right,
And it has to be accepted by whoever made the motion and
and the
whoever.
second.
So I'd like to make a friendly, was it Richard and me, Ruth? Who do I look
Yeah.
at?
Well, they both have to agree.
You better smile when you're making it.
I
think I
did.
seconded it.
I
Well,
got
whoever-
gussied up for this.
Yeah, no, okay, the person who made you, both the person who
Okay,
made the
all
motion
right.
and the person who
Okay.
seconded would have to agree.
Okay, I'd like to amend that the location of the driveway on a corner lot be left to the, how do I say this?
Homeowner.
Should be left to the, well, shall be left to the discretion of the homeowner with consideration of prevailing development patterns in their neighborhood or in the area.
Okay, before we get to that, I think that one of the difficulties I have with that is that it's not all about R1 neighborhoods, it's also about the larger developments along El Camino Real and other places where this really is an important matter.
Well,
So.
We're retaining the exception. I'm not amending the exception.
No, it's,
Can we get a sense of where the rest of us
Yeah,
feel on this?
yeah,
Because I think we
'cause
might be arguing a moot point. So
possibly, okay,
I'm not in favor of it. I would
Yeah.
leave the language as it is.
Yeah.
So
Sort of a straw poll, let's say.
I wouldn't be in favor of it only because I think it's a little bit too vague.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Richard, do you have a thought?
I got a lot of thoughts.
Yeah, one you'd like to share now?
I can understand what you're saying, Kate. And maybe the wording could be changed from may locate to can locate. I think we should have some homogeneous in neighborhoods, because we're doing that. And so it's typical you have the garage facing the main street. I can understand if there's a safety issue, but now we have to get the city engineer to determine that there's a safety issue. your idea of traffic on your street is different from somebody else. So unless we have specific wording, I'm content with the way it is. I understand what you're saying, but I don't see the wording that you're proposing that would change it and make it good for everybody, so I say as is.
Okay, Joe, thoughts?
I'm indifferent. I'm wondering, Director Zorns, if somebody really wanted to do this, could they ask for a variance if they wanted to put their driveway on the other side? If
They-
enacted as written.
Yeah, they could request the consideration of a variance. Yes.
So I'm fine either way.
Could I just want to give you guys one more thought on this. I live in an old part of Los Altos that has narrow, long lots, and I'm on a corner. Because my driveway is on the secondary street, my driveway takes up almost no paving. I mean, it's like tiny. And so if I had to put if I had a rear garage with a long driveway, the amount of hardscape to do that would be probably, 5, 6, 7 times more hardscape. So as a result of having a choice as to where to put my driveway, I have probably 10 additional trees on the site. So maybe what we should be doing is saying the driveway should be sited in a manner that minimizes hardscape. Because if we want trees and landscaping, then we should be looking at siting the driveway to minimize its size.
Well, I would contest that the purpose of this is to reduce hardscape and to increase the number of trees. But in any event, I think that let's say you were building that now and you came to the commission and said you want to do it the way you have done it because of those reasons, that would be a good reason for a variance.
I'd have to pay for a variance. That
It
would
would be
make
part
no
of-
sense.
It'd be part of the
a
application.
You would also have to pay for a design review application. So everything that you're talking about in regards to doing something requires an entitlement. You can't just build a new garage. So I mean, the majority of what we see is scrape and builds for things that we're kind of loosely talking about. So, I mean, you would still have to do an administrative design review, which is going to cost money in entitlements in order to do an alternative location for the build out. So, I mean, again, that's just another component of the equation.
Well, I agree with you about it would be great to have less hardscape. I think what Nick was saying about neighbors who are already there would like some certainty about how things are being done. I think that's important, and that to me is more important than very specific instances where it may be better to do it a different way, in which case you come and ask for a variance and your neighbors can come and support that because they would say, yes, that makes sense.
Right.
But I think I think we have to defer to staff here because staff has spent a lot of time on this. And I think we often nitpick a lot of things that staff has already thought about. So I would say, I think it's well done. If people want to do something different in very specific situations, they come and ask for a variance.
Right.
And they talk to their neighbors.
Right.
But
Okay.
if someone was to do that next door to me, if I lived in a lot where that was appropriate, I'd be kind of annoyed if they had the right to all of a sudden change the entire siding of a house when they scrape it.
Yeah. Okay, then let's go on, unless anybody has anything else to say about 050, we're on to 060, which is the development standards.
Wait, on 050,
Uh-huh.
the driveway width, the 12 and 18, that's existing. You've just moved it to this section, is that correct? That's not a change, is it?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I do have another question. Under primary access, it says when a proposed development with building frontage along Main and or State Street, the primary driveway access shall be taken from the rear of the property immediately adjacent to the public parking plaza.
Yeah.
No, I know that's probably, that's existing. But here's my question. It says the primary driveway access. Shouldn't the only driveway access be from the rear? Like what property on Main or State has a driveway access that we would say is desirable, that is off State and/or Main. I guess my question is, shouldn't it say the only driveway access shall be from the rear?
So I was intentional when I originally wrote it. I remember editing it. However, if lot consolidation does actually occur, like we would like it to for some of the sites in downtown, we're gonna run into the situation where we're gonna have the potential requirement for essentially an exit access that would not be considered the primary, or an emergency access that would be somewhat of a drive, that would be a new curb cut on State or Main Street. But we do want the primary to be from the rear. So essentially, when you're entering to park into that development, you should be going and staging from the parking plazas. But if you want to exit with egress, you actually would then potentially, depending on the site and depending on consolidation, you might exit onto the State or Main Street area. However, the big concern is going to be the primary access, and us not having something that covers primary access for State or Main Street in the future. With people doing lot consolidation, you very much will run the risk of having someone come in with some design that is going to essentially take that as a part of their almost entry feature. And we wouldn't want that. It's something that this particular thing is structured of what we kind of already see on First Street. However, that's not really an issue with the particular kind of geometry of First Street. We do have an issue with that, though, with State and Main. We wouldn't want a primary access point to be fronted off of State or Main. That's why. I mean, it could be both, but again, you're running the foul of saying you're getting then so prescriptive that then housing developments will occur in downtown, and then they have the potential of waiving the requirement altogether. This is a balancing act. It's not fun for me as a planner, trust me. I would like to be able to say it both ways, but I also then am playing devil's advocate with some of the actual development applications that what we've seen in town or in neighboring jurisdictions, and kind of having to play the planning Tetris game of what do you think a developer will not be so forced into kind of changing the rules on us.
So that's why it doesn't say only.
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, the only curb cut on Main is, the old Bank of the West or BMO, and they closed down that drive-through because they didn't want pedestrians to have to navigate around, the cars. So I thought, that's a good thing. Why aren't we promoting that? And I guess if we did, they could waive that because they would claim it's too prescriptive.
Mm-hmm. And so by having the primary, you're eliminating the potential. If you had a primary on State or Main, potentially, you're now going to create staging on State or Main. By requiring primary access from the rear of the parcel and being taken from the public parking plazas, you are now orienting staging into the parking facility into an off of the public right-of-way kind of area. An exit, if it potentially was designed that way, would then not have the staging, because the staging then occurs directly behind it, which is then essentially going down and bleeding back into the parking facility that it's coming out of. So you're not really, what we're really worried about is then the staging of in and out of a site, which, I mean, look at Santana Row, for example. You see staging issues in driveway circulation at all times of the day going into that development. And that's exactly what you really don't want if you want to be able to continue to allow for State and Main to be pedestrian activated.
Okay. Any other discussion, comments? Joe, anything about 060 that you would like to say anything
Nothing
about?
for me.
Okay, all right. Gents down here, anything? Okay.
Wait,
I
are
think
we?
that was 050.
Yeah.
050, yes, I mean 050 access, right. Right. I'm jumping ahead of myself. Okay. Then let's go on to 060, if that's it. And this, of course, has all the development standards in it, including access, loading facilities, paving materials, lighting, landscaping, wheel stops, clearances, gates, maintenance, signage, and EV stalls. So, any discussion about things in 070? I'm sorry, 060.
I think we had some points about language cleanup, which we don't need to rehash.
Right.
Is the expectation that the staff will
It gets
take our
cleaned up.
comments and clean those up?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And provide a definition of decorative concrete? Okay, so, I have a question about the lighting. I mean, just a discussion about the lighting.
Right, and let's refer to this, that's specifically sub
D.
sub D,
Right.
as in dog, and
Are we
that's on,
ready? Are we ready to talk about D?
if you are, yes, if
Okay.
everybody, I just want to give everybody a chance to get there, if they're
Okay, yeah.
maneuvering, okay.
You're
All right.
doing a great job, by the way.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, and I
Okay.
think we're there. I think I've filled enough time for people to
Okay,
find the page.
so D did not mention anything like motion sensors to ensure that lights go off. And I know that there's a lot of commercial facilities or community facilities like public schools where there's a lot of evening lighting and it might be shielded and whatnot. And then at like 11 p.m., the whole thing just shuts down and doesn't boot back up until 7 a.m. And I think that's a real service to the neighborhood when, you know, the facility can kind of shut down. And I know with maybe residential, that's not possible because people are going to be coming and going at different hours. But it might be, I think, a nice addition if we were to put something in that lights that operate, you know, in the later hours of the evening will be affixed with some kind of motion sensor so that they do go off. So I think that would be,
Well, what kind of lights are we talking about here specifically? In parking areas, or
lights.
any lights?
I mean, if it's 2 a.m, there's no motion. What's the point of having the light on? If we're really promoting dark skies,
Is that already required by state law, that
I
any
don't-
new lights have motion sensors?
Not for kind of like what I call is like accessory lighting fixtures, like landscaping, like lighting. And so that's not really something, but there are things, and it's not just motion sensors. There's also occupancy sensors. So there's actually a difference between the two. And so, and also you have to depend on where you're actually installing them. You can't do, you know, a certain one in a certain area or type of fixture. So there's kind of some nuances to that. The reason why, just so again, the Environmental Commission already has this on their boilerplate. I mean, I was just emailing with the chair of the Environmental Commission who's working on some of the ad hoc you know, research on this for that commission to report back out to the council to move forward with integration of an ordinance. These 5 kind of sub points are all things that we do essentially today, or that we see as a part. You know, we have lighting fixtures in all, you know, kind of in parking facilities essentially to some degree, or immediately adjacent to the entrance of egress and egress. But we need to just further, you know, chip away at that. It has to be oriented and shielded downward to prevent the light intrusion. And then the other sub bullets of, you know, saying that it has to be architecturally integrated into the building design. That's again just another further kind of extension of what we already do. So these are just further clarification, and then really kind of chipping away at something that was actually previously brought up at the CSC, which is making sure that we have lighting for walkways and the paths of travel for pedestrians to the on-site parking facilities. So again, we're kind of calling out specifically what we want lit, and if anything that isn't specifically called out that we want lit, it needs to then adhere to kind of shielding things downward, which is the basic principles. the motion sensors, and then also what you're referring to about when they just turn off at a certain time and they don't come back on until, whatever other time of the day, that's considered a light curfew. And that is something that is being considered as a part of the master dark sky ordinance, which would be standalone and cover all lighting for anything within the city.
And I would add to that, in my experience, generally that sort of, the light curfew sort of thing, switching off lights is a normal part of the operation of larger buildings. And it wouldn't necessarily be for single-family homes, but for multifamily residences and others, that's already incorporated. So the things switch off as the time goes on.
It's not incorporated in the ordinance.
No, but it's incorporated as a practice. In other words, well, no, I will tell you as an HOA president, it is incorporated, and we do it. So I don't know that we need to put everything that could possibly happen into the statute at this point. So that would not be my thought. Okay. Anything else any other points that want to be raised about 060, the general standards, or the design standards? These are it's to some extent the objective standards portion of the thing. And then 070, if there's nothing else, are we?
Okay, just back to the trees.
Okay.
So we're gonna have an urban forest master plan.
Microphone, please.
We're gonna have an urban forest master plan. I don't know when, but it sounds like we're gonna get one, which is wonderful. But in the meantime, we have this ordinance, which is gonna direct one to put in these diamonds for trees on parking, surface parking structures. I'm wondering if we should adhere to what we currently have in the city, which is 6 by 7 foot wells, because a 4 by 4 is in terms of area is a lot smaller than a 6 by 7 foot well. And I'm just wondering, is there interest in keeping the planting diamond the same as what we currently have in downtown, so that we can get category 2 trees?
I would defer to staff on that one. I don't know when the 6 by 7 was decided, but that could have been 50 years ago under very different circumstances. So I'd be curious to hear Director Zorn's thoughts on changing that.
Commissioner Beninato, I think kind of hit it on the head. I don't know when those diamonds were included. We do not have provisions for diamonds today. This was something that I thought would have been a creative mechanism to be able to provide more landscape coverage on site as a potential way to help steer developers to be able to creatively provide when they're doing surface lots. I do have a fundamental problem with going from 16 square feet to 42 square feet. We're talking about over twice the size when you actually do the multiplier out. So again, the commission, I know you guys don't like hearing this, and I get it. I don't as a planner, but you guys are going to run the foul of pushing the limits and then getting left with nothing.
Is it fair to say that 4 by 4 is used in other communities?
For diamonds in parking, surface parking lots, yes.
One of the things that you said at a prior meeting, Nick, was that we should be really looking at how to design for canopy. And so there's different ways to get that. You could create a lot of little 4 by 4 diamonds, or for the same amount of area, you could create fewer 6 by 7 diamonds. And in doing so, you can actually get maybe a category 1 tree or many category 2s, as opposed to about a lot of arbutus trees that don't get more than 20 feet high. I guess, so I'm wondering if there's any chance that this this ordinance could get adjusted later after we've done an urban forest master plan and it's determined that we're going to get better canopy with a different design. Not necessarily more area, but maybe a different design where you have fewer larger wells.
I mean, that's definitely possible, yes. You also have to remember is that we kind of actually talked about this at the council meeting when we were talking about the rezoning of OA. We don't really see surface parking as a part of development anymore. We're not seeing extensive, multi-level underground, but we're just seeing people drop everything one layer underneath the surface and covering the parcel as much as they possibly can to get as much FAR as possible and lot coverage. So we're just not fundamentally seeing surface parking lots. This is just a one layer to be able to help be able to have something better than some of the big surface parking that you think of when you think of the old from the 80s and 90s regional shopping malls that were just all asphalt with nothing in the entire sea of parking, just to help break it up to some degree, but we're just fundamentally not seeing it. So in the development that's occurred in town, surface lots are just going away more and more. And again, if it's in a public parking plaza, we're talking about something that we're setting a minimum, not a maximum. So if the city is talking about wanting to do the Chinese pistachio trees more and more in downtown, we'll have to do whatever is best under arboricultural practice. So.
All right. Anything else? Okay, now we get to go on to 070, which is the alternatives, and these are things like mechanical lifts and that sort of thing, which will, again, allow those to happen. It's not mandating, but it's allowing them to happen. Any discussion of that issue? Joe, I'm not seeing your hand, so I'm assuming you are.
I was curious about the comments you made earlier about the changing of the ADA stall size and whether or not we should consider that here. Nick, do you have a preference on that? I would defer to you, but it sounds like if that parameter has changed, maybe we should consider going with whatever the current standard is.
So the ADA stall requirement is something that you usually remain mute on for like in an actual parking standard, because we're always going to have to adhere to the ADA requirements no matter what our zoning code says. You don't get to vest in for those rights. That's why you often see ADA lawsuits frequently, because people haven't just come up to date with their site. So where I was talking about though previously is to change our standard parking dimensions would then we would need to look at potentially a way to then reduce down like our essentially the drive aisles and the paths of travel for when you are driving in parking facilities to see if there's the kind of the turning radiuses that we can reduce down, so that if we were to extend further, then we can. Again, though, you can't just put ADA stalls though anywhere. They have to be the ones that are absolutely as close as possible to the path of travel for ADA compliance. So let's say we were to do the entire parking lot, or we did some of the stalls that were site planned on the opposite side, but that's not a part of the path of travel. So again, ADA compliant, it's always going to be an evolving iterative thing. So I don't really think us even taking that step is, unless we said everything, is going to be that way, you're always going to run the foul. And we're now talking about introducing compact stalls, so you're not really going to get the entire sea of parking all being the same dimension, which I think is kind of what almost the thought process would be is, oh, well, we have standard parking stalls, let's just expand them another, 10%. And now we're going to have the potential to make all of them ADA capable stalls, and that's not going to necessarily be the case, because then you're going to also have to have the loading area of each of them. And so again, the ADA thing is, it's really complex. That's why people keep it standalone in the building code.
Right.
So I wouldn't recommend it. I just don't think it's necessary at this time. I think we're more so seeing an alternative of reducing down the sizes is what we've seen for the compact. But again, we can look at it again further once we're trying to get ahead of something right now that's not really been a fundamental reoccurring issue for development. Maybe some complex existing sites that have had to reorient some parking and striping, but for ADA compliance, a lot of people have to do that all the time. So,
Yeah. And it's also
one
for,
of
it's also
I'm
for a
sorry.
relatively small number of stalls within a thing. The requirements are, you'd have 1, 2, or in a very, very large one, perhaps 3 that would be required given the ratios that the ADA sets out. So,
Yeah.
but I'm just, again, as somebody who's had to deal with this post-eventum, it's really convenient if things are planned so that you can do that. And I just wanted to raise that point. I think, did you have more? Richard also was wanting to say something, and I think maybe.
Oh,
I just
ahead,
wanted
Joe.
to follow up briefly. I don't know if anyone else has noticed this, but I've had multiple situations in the last couple of years where I could literally not get past a long truck that was in one of our parking plazas because it stuck out so far into the plaza that it was impassable. And there've been other situations where there's maybe a delivery vehicle in the loading zone, right behind some of the properties on Main Street, and a truck sticking out so far, and there's 6 feet of space to get through. So I'm not sure how to address that, or if that was just it's probably happened 4 or 5 times to me personally, and I have a fairly wide car, so maybe that's part of the issue. But making the flow of traffic stop because someone didn't pull all the way into a spot or has a large pickup truck causes all sorts of problems, and there's no way to get an officer out to do anything about it or solve the problem other than back everybody up who's in line behind you, and it's a real nuisance. So I don't know if we can solve that with any of this, but that's what I was getting at, was the length of the stalls, not necessarily the width.
Right. Okay.
Has anyone else seen this problem, or is it just unique to me?
Oh, I've seen it, but I think it's just bad driving. I
Okay,
don't
there-
think you can
there-
legislate that.
Not you, them.
Not you, them. Bad parking.
I was gonna agree on the parking, the big trucks driving down and they're sticking out, and there's a UPS truck unloading, and then you're trying to get by. But I had
Okay.
Nick, when the parking survey is being done, do they look at the size of the vehicles? They say, okay, there's 80% SUVs and there's 10% regular cars and there's some Priuses. Do they give any concept to what are the buyers, what are the people driving today? Because if we're getting away from the SUVs, the big ones, then the stalls can be maybe like they used to be, more standard size. With the big SUVs, they wouldn't fit in. If you got a lot of Priuses and you got some Mini Coopers, they take less space. Do they do that? Do they measure that in the survey?
They don't. However, one of the things though that comes out of all of these parking, we wouldn't even have to do a study if we just wanted to talk about doing a comprehensive sign program for wayfinding and for what stalls are meant to be oversized ones. And fundamentally, that's actually what, I would, even if our study didn't recommend that, we need to explicitly label some of them are short stall ones. And we do that because we have, what we all know is the big AT&T boxes, especially along, 2nd or 3rd Street, that are, providing, the fiber cables and stuff and the access to them. So there's some of those that we're going to need to label and actually have adequate signage. Not every single stall needs to, but the ones that are the oversized or the undersized or compact or motorcycle, you do need to label those ones accordingly so people know which ones are available to them. And that's one of the things that downtown Los Altos specifically, I mean, we're very behind on doing that. However, if we're going to make a modification to circulation in downtown, you don't want to pay, 6 figures on a bunch of signage that you're then going to have to either remove, replace, or modify. So we kind of need to holistically look at it all first, which is what this study will do, and then it will have even a generic saying you need signage to be able to indicate where what is.
Okay. My pleasure. We're coming up on 9 o'clock, and we traditionally either take a break. Does anybody need a break? We're close to finishing. We can either push through and just finish or take a little break, and I will be guided by the requirements of my
Push through.
push through. Okay. All right. That was my vote too, but I checked. Okay. The next section would be 080 mixed use parking requirements.
Did anybody ask Joe what he wants?
Oh, well,
I would have said something. I'm fine, pending how many more topics are going to be covered. So let's hope we can push through in the next 30 to 60 minutes.
I think it's going to be fairly quick. I think that the substantive stuff mostly has been gone through. Mixed-use parking requirements of 080. Any discussion of that section? Not hearing any. I'm going to go on to 090, which is the loading facilities. And again, is there anything there that anybody wishes to?
I have a question.
Okay.
This whole chapter, everything, all zoning districts apply to this ordinance, this chapter.
Whole city.
Okay, so I'm reading 14.74090, and it looks the way it's written that every development shall have a loading facility. That can't be true in R1. No one has a loading facility in R1. So I think, would it be helpful here to specify when a loading facility is required and when it is not? Because I don't think we always want to require one, because everything's a trade-off, when you're doing design. I mean, you get one thing and you give up something else. And if you have a loading facility and it's in your front yard, you're giving up trees and canopy and landscaping. So I guess, can we specify here that there has to be a need for a loading facility before we're going to require one as a city?
Isn't specifying a need getting into details that we would be vulnerable to, challenges?
Yes, I will.
I understand the R1 point. But I'm
Yeah,
just saying
and
beyond
so
that.
do I. So I mean, I would recommend you can be as generic as saying, and I can include it in. I'm taking notes as we go. Is that in order to accommodate all developments, you could do in non-residential and mixed-use zoning districts, and leave it that way, or you could say all developments in non-residential zoning districts and mixed-use development with greater than 10 residential dwelling units. So if you want to set it at that, so that it's kind of like, yeah, we don't really need it if it's going to be, you wouldn't need it for the quadplex that I approved in the middle of last year. I mean, that's just, they essentially have a long drive aisle. They're fine. They don't need another loading zone. For a 10plex, I mean, with, maybe 10,000 square feet of commercial, mixed use, you generally do, because you're robbing Paul to pay Peter and Mary with parking sometimes, with mixed use development. Not always, but sometimes you are, just because of the facilities. So you could do it that way, like I said, as generic as just non-residential and mixed use zoning developments, or set it as non-residential and mixed use with 10 or more units.
I would like,
No, go ahead, you read it.
I like the latter.
But
That's my friendly amendment.
Well, before we do that, wouldn't we also want to include larger multifamily developments, because they have the same need as the others?
With
I
10 or
mean,
more.
That's right, yeah.
well, yeah, but it's the non-residential part that I guess is bothering me. I can understand the point about the R1, and we would want to exclude that, but would we want to include?
Well, so
Nick, how
we
would you
could
address this, I
define
think,
it as housing developments with 10 or greater units. I don't want to get down the argument of that. A housing development can be a mixed use housing. It can be mixed use
Right.
if it's greater than 2/3 residential
Right.
to the non-residential of 1/3.
Right.
So it does make sense for exactly what we're talking about, but it's wordsmithing it to say the multifamily is inclusive of that, because then we're still then saying 10 units or greater if it's mixed use or multifamily.
Right.
As that's the definition of housing law.
Right,
So
and I just wanted,
Yeah.
I wanted to make sure that the multifamily was included in that, didn't seem to be excluded. The point about the R1 is, you know,
Well, I was gonna say, Nick, it sounds like there is a standard definition for multifamily housing, the 10 units. You were saying if we could perhaps propose a friendly amendment that incorporates that and gets to Kate's point about R1, et cetera, can you suggest something there?
yeah, so like I was saying is so that to accommodate the delivery or shipping of goods, all developments in non-residential zoning districts and any housing developments of 10 or greater units. I'll wordsmith it when I'm kind of writing it all out, but fundamentally, I mean, that's what I can include. And I will also just explicitly include the exception is that the loading facilities do not apply to R1. I mean, we wouldn't apply it, honestly, just as a best practice, but we can further clarify that loading zones do not apply in R1.
right.
I mean, we don't have a single loading zone in an R1 district in the city, so.
It's called the street.
Yeah.
It works really well.
Well, except when it's El Camino Real.
Right.
Does anyone have an objection to that? I don't think that I'm hearing anything, so I think that we all agree that that would be a reasonable amendment. So that will go in our list. Okay. Unless there's anything else, we seem to have lost Joe. Or did we lose Joe? He's not on my screen anymore. Okay.
Yeah.
As long as he's around.
Still here.
Still there, okay. Did you have anything you wanted to add to before we move on to the next section?
No, I'm supportive of the changes you mentioned.
Okay. All right, and then that brings us up to section 100, which is the downtown parking provisions, much of which is going to be in the ultimate plan that we do, but this provides some background. Any discussion of that?
I have some thoughts on this. So
Okay.
the objective in the housing element reads, facilitate at least 2 downtown lot consolidations by January 2031. If by 2027 this objective is not on track to be met, meaning there isn't at least one consolidation going on, the city will offer increased incentives. That objective doesn't mention Maine and state. And I'm just wondering, why does BI specifically call out Maine and state? Why doesn't it just say, downtown in general? We'll take any lot consolidation. It could be on first, it could be on second. Why bother restricting us to Maine and state?
I don't think it restricts it.
Well, it kind of does, because it says specifically along Main Street and State Street, and then later it says consolidation for the redevelopment of existing buildings with frontages along Main Street and State Street. I don't think, my point is, who cares? Like, if you're trying to get housing in downtown, we'll take any consolidation. Why are we writing this in a way that seems to target Main and State? Because the objective doesn't.
So we the fragmented ownership and the small lot subdivision that has occurred, I mean, historically for years, is along State and Main Street. We all know essentially almost every building on State and Main, with exception of one, development really that's consolidated and redeveloped, really in, you know, the last several decades, I mean, nothing's really happened other than just some new businesses and some facade improvements, so on and so forth. We have seen, you know, on like what we kind of call the side streets when you kind of take State and Main off, is, you know, everything that has the cross laterals from, you know, first, second, and third, we have seen, but those are bigger parcel sizes when you actually look at like our city GIS map online. They're just square footage wise, they're all bigger. And so we could look at doing essentially, you know, I wouldn't want to open it up, honestly, from a practicality standpoint of, because then we're saying with the way that this is structured that then essentially all residential development in downtown Los Altos gets one parking stall, and that's for market rate as well. We haven't needed that on First Street. That's why we've seen a good amount of development get approved. Yes, more could get approved on a variety of parcels, but that's just through, you know, the natural access and availability of parcels that we'll see more. Fundamentally, we're gonna be more at the point of we need to incentivize State and Main, because there's long-term property owners and people that have held on to those parcels that they're going to need some incentive to be able to say, all right, well, you know, I don't have to provide parking for my commercial land that's already developed right this second, because I've kind of bought into this parking plaza district, you know, from 50 plus years ago. You know, if I want to, you know, consolidate, maybe pick up a lot next door from the person that I've known for, you know, decades, yeah, I'll do that, but I need to have some type of an incentive where I know I don't need to replace the parking or provide parking for the commercial, but everything I start going up, the commercial and the affordable parking, it's going to be at a much lower threshold, so I'm not going to have to, you know, build down, you know, 3 stories in order to park it all. So the incentive really does, in my mind, need to be on State and Main for something like this when it comes to an incentivization of non, you know, affordable units, so market rate units, because we already have built into the parking ratio section a reduced threshold for the BMR units. So we kind of are doing that. So we want to influence development on State and Main to occur. And that's where it's going to be hard. That's why there's an actual program specific to just providing lot consolidation. We're not having a problem with lot consolidation on the other areas of downtown.
Okay, but the objective is we have to facilitate. I think what that means, we have to incentivize at least 2 downtown lot consolidations. And if by 2027, we don't have one consolidation going on, we have to increase the incentives no later than July 2027. So my question is, let's say the consolidation is not on Main or State. So by 2027, we've got consolidation on some other street. Does that mean we're good? We don't have to add additional increased incentives because we have facilitated or incentivized, whatever word you want to use, to get at least one lot consolidation in downtown?
So we're creating the regulatory environment that are incentives for us to help influence the environment. We have seen consolidation of parcels on First Street, for example. 355 First Street is consolidating 4 parcels.
Mm-hmm.
So
would that count? I guess my question is, if we've done that, then are we good on meeting this objective?
we would be able to satisfy it because they haven't pulled building permits yet, and you don't get to count it as credit until they pull a building permit.
Okay.
Yeah, so the consolidation one, I'm not necessarily that worried about for us. But I do want to help incentivize. We have had multiple retail establishments go out of business because they cannot afford to make the non-residential building improvements to a structure that they don't own, that they lease and rent. We've also had 2 businesses in downtown Los Altos in older, small buildings that have been sued by ADA lawsuits, and they have lost their businesses because of it. Because the buildings are, that what we call that in building, the building is failing. The building doesn't have to be falling down, but when you have to make a $250,000 improvement to the actual structure to essentially rip out all of the guts of ingress, egress, everything, and then you start triggering all of the other requirements under Title 24 and everything else that the building code contains, it ends up chipping away and racking up quite quickly. And so for what we know is our downtown district, it's a lot of small business owners, and they don't have the deep pockets to be able to fix that. And the property owners aren't incentivized to have to do it either, because they have tenants, and they don't need to consolidate at this point unless they have an incentive to do it. So long story short, I think we're good for consolidation on essentially the side streets, but we should be trying to focus on consolidation and incentivizing it for the state and main area. It's gonna be more challenging for them because they have to pick up multiple lots in order to make it work anyways.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Any other? Okay, then we will move on to 110, which is the common parking facilities. Any discussion, comments about that? I'm seeing shaking heads. Joe, I'm not seeing you, so I don't know if you've been raising your hand, but.
I'll chime in if I need to.
Okie dokie. All right. Now I see you, but, okay. All right, then 120, if there's nothing on 110, 120 is the authorization to execute agreements, and this is just an enabling provision to allow these things to move forward. And then the last one, 130, is the parking ratios, the chart, which has all of the parking ratios. Are there any comments about those?
The only comment I think was about for me, was the definition. Oh, the extensive and intensive. You're saying it's in
It's
Article
actually,
2, so
yeah.
should there be a reference to it, I guess?
Okay.
We don't reference the general definition section. That's why anytime we want to define something, we really, as we're going through some of these chapters and we want to further, if it's not something that's referenced in state law definition, and it's a city zoning definition, we really don't want to put it in any individual chapter. We always want it to be kind of like the catch-all, so it's not something that's only a definition for parking rather than the definition for all of zoning.
So, okay, any other? Because if that's it, because the rest of it is all crossed out. Okay, so I think it's time to call for the vote. And again, to remind us, the motion is to recommend to the City Council that they adopt the ordinance. There are a few changes which Nick has noted, and I think that we know what those are, a few small details, but there were no substantive changes. They're small corrections, and I have a couple of little, they're not important. Okay, so it's time, I think, to move to the vote. Stephanie, if you would like to call the roll.
Sure. Commissioner Disney,
Aye.
Commissioner Ahi,
Yes.
Commissioner Roach,
Yes.
Commissioner Mensinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Benato,
Yes.
and Commissioner Steinle.
Yes, indeed.
That's unanimous.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody, and that was a very, I love discussions about parking ratios.
Yeah.
It really, no,
On the
this
edge
is
of my
this is
seat.
what got me on sitting on this dais is parking ratios. So that was my specialty. So next thing on our agenda is commissioners' reports and comments. Does anyone have anything to report? We've been sloppy about the results of city council meetings, except they have accepted everything that we have proposed. So we're on track.
Have we been assigned city council meetings for this year?
Well, I think we had the
I don't think we have them for 2024.
okay. Then we don't. Then we'll
Not that I'm asking for
yeah,
it, but
yeah.
just.
We'll request
Yeah,
ask for well, I can report, since I go to every city council meeting, that they have accepted everything that we have proposed, and I don't think there's anything facing us at this point. And as I understand, it's on the agenda for their meeting of February, I think it's 13 or 14, whatever it is, that to bring this particular thing back up. So they will be taking our recommendation at that point. Any other?
Should we continue the practice of reporting out on city council meetings? Is that helpful to anybody?
It is, I think, actually a requirement, sort of. So yes,
Okay.
it doesn't require that you be at the meeting. It just means that you know what happened at the meeting, and if there was anything relating to the planning commission that you think should be brought to our attention, et cetera.
Got it.
So, so the next thing is potential future agenda items, and I guess, Nick, I'm going to turn to you if we have an idea of what's on our schedule going forward.
Yes. So the city council at the end of last year did kind of give a green light for me to return later this month with setting an inclusionary housing fee in lieu fee. That's not something that will take planning commission participation in the legislative action. However, they did also provide some direction to do some modifications and tweaks to the inclusionary housing ordinance. So still something housing related, but it's not, something that's 100% initiated from the housing element itself. With that being said, we also are going to be doing something a little bit kind of to make sure we have some checks and balances, is some property frontage improvement ordinance. Again, that's not something that is initially, needed by the planning commission because it's something that just lives in the municipal code, but I do want to at least let you guys know that that's something that we will be bringing forward, as well as the tree protection ordinance, which lives in the miscellaneous property regulations, so not something planning does do. But those are some specific things that will help the development applications that you inevitably will see forward. So it's not an authority of the commission, but it's a benefit to the commission for us to be amending those. And then there will be some additional planning ordinances that are initiated from the housing element to kind of bring us up to kind of full implementation for anything that requires zoning code changes.
Okay. All right. Are there any developments in the pipeline at this point that you anticipate over the next month or so?
Month or so, no, but I would say within the next 60 to 90 days, we are pretty close. We're kind of ironing out. We thought we were at the finish line with a couple of them to bring them forward pretty soon, but developers wanting to kind of make some last minute switches and changes to certain things. So I do think we'll start seeing more and more, but we are seeing more and more interest in the development community after the operative date of the ordinances have now gone into effect. So we will see things forthcoming soon.
Okay. All right. Okay. Anything else? Anybody?
Do we have a meeting
Yeah.
in 2 weeks? Oh, sorry.
Oh, Joe. Well,
Sorry, I just had one question about the on November 28th, the city council approved the library patio orchard modification, and I was curious if that was coming before planning commission.
They didn't, what they did was they authorized the use of city property for the patio. Now the patio is going to go through the design review process. So once there's an application and it's deemed complete and it will eventually get to planning commission, but they didn't approve a patio. They approved the use of the land for the patio.
Didn't they also
Okay.
have to say it was going to be private funds, so they have to raise the money first?
no, the money's available.
The money's
That's-
available.
I
money's
didn't,
available.
yeah,
Oh, it
money
is.
didn't
Okay.
get
Yeah.
involved
Okay.
with that.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Yes. Okay. And then,
Do we have a meeting in 2 weeks?
No, that meeting will be, unless there's a development application. No, it will be canceled. There won't be amendments going forward. So
okay. And so our next meeting could be February 1st?
Potentially, but
I'm
that
asking
would
for a
probably
friend,
be an amendment.
Susan may not be there if it's February 1st because she has a conflict. She can't be in two places at the same time.
I'm returning that day from Singapore. I'm just not quite
Right.
sure what state
So,
it'll be.
so her body may be here,
Yeah.
but it's not entirely clear that Susan herself will be with it in the circumstances. So, February 1.
Yeah, it's the next meeting.
No, February
No, no.
1st, we may
2
be going
weeks is
forward.
canceled.
But we're not going to have another meeting in January. Okay. So, as I understand things. Okay? All right, with that, at about 9:20 in the evening, we're done.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
Thanks, everybody.
Hope you feel better.
Thank you.
You know, I never did either. I was kind of cocky about it. Really? We were in Europe and came back with it. It just happened to everybody we know.
I went to Europe, I didn't get it.
Good for you. And we had the later shot.
I've had 5 shots. I'm up on my shots. Yeah, you know, my son and husband got COVID in Spain.
Yeah, that's what we think we got.
Yeah.
That's funny.
But
And you guys were, yes, so you didn't.
no,
know.
I wasn't there
Oh, you
for
weren't
that
there.
trip.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. It's too bad.
thank you.
That's what happens. You know,
I think that the technique of doing the motion and then the discussion actually works pretty well. So, yeah.
This is one reason I wanted to, the reason I didn't take the second is that I've been on a lot of committees, trustee and so forth. And I like working